Professor Marc Lepere, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. It was very interesting to hear that excellent performance in many ways from the last speaker, and obviously some very impressive results in terms of room rates and occupancy, maybe a little bit, perhaps less so. But what I want to do is really take the next literally nine minutes to really focus your mind on the fact that we operate, all of us are operating in very uncertain times. And that's largely caused by the collapse in many ways of the post-war census that existed, the consensus that existed around politics, which we see fragmenting in many parts of the world, and obviously the economic consensus. Only this morning, the uncertainty, we see that the tariffs between the US and China have been reduced by over 100%. If that's not uncertain times, then I don't know what is. And so it's not surprising that the consensus that emerged around the Paris Agreement around climate change in 2015 is also under real pressure and is beginning to break down. So as business leaders, we have a question we need to ask ourselves. What do we want to do? Do we want to listen to the rhetoric of essentially opportunists? They might be political opportunists, or they, in the case of President Trump here, repeated in many parts of the world also, or they may be actually business opportunists who simply do not want to accept that they need to change their business models in the short term. They want to keep things exactly as they are. No need for change, thank you. It'll see me out. It'll see my time. And there's a real risk of over listening to that, but also being distracted by that, compared to actually thinking about the reality and running our businesses accordingly. In terms of the reality, I'd like to show you something called the Actuaries Climate Index. It's from the American Academy of Actuaries. What I'm going to show you is the USA and Canada version. There are versions for Australia, Spain, and France. And essentially, like any index, this is a basket of measures, metrics. In this case, 5 extreme climate events, which are low and high temperatures, precipitation, drought, extreme wind, and then they've added in sea level rise as well. And what you can see on the left of the graph here is that they've taken a benchmark period from 1960 to 1990, and then they've looked at the performance of those 6 metrics against that benchmark. And you can see, without doubt, it's rising every year. And to pick up on what the introducer was just saying, you can see these risks playing out in various ways. To use a medical analogy, they're described as either chronic, i.e. ongoing, or they're acute, they're sporadic, they flare up, maybe suddenly from time to time. And just in the last few years, we can see this playing out. Drought in Spain is now chronic. The estimates are that 75% of Spain will be a desert by 2040, 75%. We see heat waves across Europe, Greece, Spain, Italy, France in 2022, 2023, and again last year, a chronic situation. We see acute flooding in this case in Kenya, in Africa. We see sea level rise is now chronic along much of the Japanese coastline. Smog, many Chinese cities have air quality and smog problems of a chronic nature. In Saudi here, where you are, I should say, chronic heat waves getting worse and worse in the summer months, particularly. Acute flooding just before Christmas, you may remember this in Spain. Whilst most of it's going to be a desert, you do get acute flooding as well. In this case, it was in Valencia. Earlier this year, more acute flooding, this time in Brisbane in Australia. And then extreme wind not so long ago on the east coast of the US in Florida. And at the same time as that was happening, we had LA burning because of wildfires, largely brought about by drought. Now, all these pictures, you can see the physical destruction to real estate and infrastructure. The LA fires, by the way, are estimated to have resulted in economic losses of about 250 billion. And what's fascinating is that only 40 billion of that was insured. And that's because the major insurers, State Farm and Allstate, started withdrawing from the market about 18 months previously, partly because of the risk of wildfires and partly because state laws wouldn't allow them to put the premiums up enough. So the rebuilding of LA, the re-establishment of those property asset values are going to have been massively impaired by the loss of insurance cover and potentially the cost of insurance going forward. And that's really important, because what this chart is showing us is, if we look at the global economy, which essentially is what this chart is, we look at the right-hand side, let's call it 100 trillion, you can see that nearly 38% of it is affected by those physical risks to real estate, whether it's residential, commercial, or agricultural. That's why financial regulators around the world are getting exercised about this. It represents a serious threat to the financial system, and obviously to all of us in our individual businesses. But those physical changes, heat waves, droughts, wildfires, etc., also cause what we call transition risks. And these are risks to your business models, essentially to your operational performance, to EBITDA. So if I go back to the 22-23 heat waves in Europe, the olive crop failed for 2 years in a row. And no surprise, the prices have gone through the roof, so much so that it is not beyond the possibility, certainly in Europe, that olives will become a luxury item. Quite some distance from how we've always viewed them. So in terms of a venue, a forum for us to think about sustainability, I would encourage you not to listen to the rhetoric of opportunist politicians who are chasing their own agendas, or business people who pretend that none of this is happening, or get distracted by it. I would encourage you to focus on what we all know and are very familiar with, which is essentially discounted cash flow models, which is really how we all make decisions in our businesses, and particularly how we allocate capital. So if we think about the cash flow in the numerator, it is essentially EBITDA. There are lots and lots, contrary to the myth, there are lots and lots of sustainability actions to build resilience against those kind of risks that we've been talking about, that actually save money in the short term, that can be achieved through behavioral change rather than CapEx. There are some that require minimal CapEx or maybe low levels of CapEx, and it's typically only the last 40 to 50% that require high CapEx. And clearly that needs to be considered over different timeframes rather than just short-term annual reporting cycles. The last thing is to say that the discount value in the denominator, certainly in hospitality, is, as you all know very well, EBITDA divided by the property value. If you have properties in areas like I've been showing you, they are going to be devalued. There is no question about that. You will have to do things to build resilience. So that's where I'd focus your attention. The one piece of regulation I think you should pay attention to more than any other, apart from the ones you have to comply with, are the new international financial reporting standards on the sustainability side. So for those of you who don't know, these are in the process of being adopted worldwide. Japan adopted them not so long ago. The UK are in the process of doing so. Canada, Singapore, South Africa. About 60% of global GDP is now in the process or has adopted these. And in effect, the IFRS standards that we know, the financial standards, are being joined by these new sustainability, essentially climate-related disclosures at the moment. And the idea of the IFRS is what they call to create a global baseline which provides a consistent and comparable ability to take this sustainability information, risk information, and price it into and integrate it with financial information to get to a much better sense of what these risks are and to put real numbers on them. For what it's worth, the sustainability data is regarded as material in exactly the same way financial materiality exists. So this is the definition of financial materiality for our reporting that we all use. It is exactly the same for the climate-related risks that we've been looking at. In fact, the IFRS regards climate reporting, sustainability reporting more generally, as financial reporting. And that's the important thing. It's about the integration of the two. So that's it. Thank you for listening. I hope that was helpful. I hope it's focused the mind. Stay on the signal. Focus on the signal. Listen to the signals, not the noise. Thank you.